Ethiopia, in East Africa, has a lot of mineral resources and is bordered by the dangerous Red Sea. Oil pipelines stretch out along the stream valley to Europe to control the oil exchange, which is equivalent to keeping the financial help of this country. The U.S. military has an army installation in Ethiopia controlling the wildernesses of Africa. High up in the valley, Rifleman Strutt and his colleague then, at that point, are on a mysterious mission. They get orders from the military. When Fen finished calculating the sniper data, the opposite lane on the terrorist side appeared, ensuring the safe evacuation of soldiers as the convoy came into view. Swagger immediately fired 2 shots. The armed vehicle overturned on the side of the road, and both the gunman and the driver were shot in the head. Just as the convoy was about to leave, a large number of terrorist rebels followed and Swagger opened fire to intercept, panicking the terrorists. However, they also run the chance of being discovered. The enemy used mortars to counterattack, and the shells fell close to them, where they would explode if they weren't careful. Fan immediately requested reinforcements from the commander. However, due to international law, the commander closed the signal so that the army could fight with their own swagger and abandoned them. They intended to launch an attack with armed helicopters, under intense enemy aircraft fire. Fen was shot a few times. Fen, the good guy, passed away instantly. Swagger's pain was unbearable. In order to avoid losing his observer and hit a moving target, he used the heavy sniper on the ground facing the falling helicopter. Finally, Swagger has struck the helicopter's propeller and escaped thanks to his mental toughness and excellent sniper skills. After 2 weeks, the intelligence commander who had given up Swagger vanished. Discouraged, he made the decision to leave the army. For 3 years, he lived alone in the deep, snow-covered mountains, growing vegetables and hunting nearby. Keep it simple. Life on his own. Sam is a hunting dog who has been raised by Swagger since childhood and has always been by his side. Until one day, a few unwelcome guests disrupted the quiet life of Swagger. Colonel Johnson, who had traveled thousands of miles to be of assistance. Swagger's attitude was determined to drive the guests away, but Johnson was fully prepared for what the military accomplished. He gained his trust by demonstrating his patriotism and camaraderie with Swagger, telling him that the enemy had infiltrated the government agency and planned to assassinate the president within 2 days. Throughout this time, the president will attend 3 events, and according to intelligence, the shot will be fired 1.5 kilometers away. According to Swagger, that temperature. Shooting accuracy is affected by things like humidity, altitude, the direction of the wind, and even the Earth's rotation. He advises them to hunt where the target is about to be because the president will likely be wearing a bulletproof vest because it takes between 6 and 10 seconds for the bullet to reach the target. The killer would target the victim's head. At such a great distance, very few shooters can accurately fire. Johnson said that the military ought to employ a rifleman like Strutt to forestall this death. Strutt dismissed Johnson. Johnson stated that he would regret watching the television news about the assassination of the president even though he did not want to get involved in this mess. Swagger struggled with his past as Johnson drove off, so he pulled out his familiar sniper rifle and fired at the target, after aiming for about 5 to 6 seconds. With high precision, the bullet struck the target 1 kilometer away. The president is, in fact, more or less safe if there is a sniper who can perform at his level. Swagger made the decision, after giving it some thought, to descend the mountain. Prior to leaving, he sent Sam to a companion. He traveled to 3 distinct areas: Washington, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. Sweater contacted Johnson after observing the situation and coming to the conclusion that only Philadelphia was a suitable location for the assassination, stating that there were 6 locations where it was most likely to be shot. He made the decision to personally visit the location as a spectator as the presidential motorcade arrived at the airport one by one and security personnel were in place to ensure that nothing went wrong. Ethiopia's archbishop will give a speech at the venue, exposing the atrocities committed against his country, and prepare to hold talks with Johnson. Sent police officers Timmins to help Swagger. A black gun was pointed at the president after he appeared at one of the lookout points and planned when to shoot. He has given a dire alarm requesting crisis powers to quickly act. Timmins shot him unexpectedly before he could finish his sentence. Strutt was hit by a slug. Blood splattered simultaneously. The ecclesiastical overseer was likewise shot in the head by a rifleman. The entire crowd went into a frenzy. Protectors quickly safeguarded the president to move. Johnson requested his subordinates to empty the scene, pursuing and killing Strutt. Another group set up Swagger's guns to create the appearance of a crime scene. Previously, Swagger was an excellent sniper who held a grudge against the government and the military. Therefore, there was a criminal purpose. So, Johnson simply maintained that him should be the trap for this plot. However, his death did not proceed as smoothly as they anticipated. The Philadelphia police quickly joined in and made an arrest across the entire city. Nick, a young FBI agent, comes across the wounded Swagger, who also used a trick to rob Nick's gun and vehicle key. He assured Nick that he was not guilty. After that, Timmons rushed to the scene and informed Johnson of the situation. There were police helicopters above the ground, and police cars were racing through the streets looking for Swagger to avoid detection. Instead, Swagger drove into an automated car wash, where his wound continued to bleed. He endured intense pain and administered first aid to stop his screams, and thankfully, there is a first aid box hidden in the back seat of the vehicle. According to public reports, the police found out where Swagger was, blocked his escape with police cars, fired shots into his car to help him survive, and Swagger quickly reversed his car and fell into the river. The police searched along the river, but they still couldn't find him. Swagger, a war veteran, could not simply pass away in that manner. He escaped upstream by clinging to a ferry's barge, then stole a car and drove away from the police while encircling me. When he reached shore, he gasped and began to vomit blood. Late at night, Swagger successfully hacked the pharmacy's electrical system, obtained some medical supplies, and bandaged himself in the bathroom as a U.S. Marine. He then disguised himself and immediately went to Kentucky that night to seek assistance from a friend at the time. For the past 3 years, Sarah's fence girlfriend, had been living there by herself. Sarah was shocked when she saw Swagger arrive at the address. The news of the president's assassination was all over the news. Before that, she had never met Strut. Swagger swore to her that he had been framed and that he had not attempted to assassinate the president after receiving only letters and flowers from him. His body was wet at this point. His body was extremely weak and his breathing was rapid. After some hesitation, Sarah was still unsure whether to trust him or not. She decided to assist him regardless. She purchases medications from a variety of pharmacies in accordance with Swagger's list. After inhaling nitric oxide, Swagger entered a coma. Sarah bandaged and stitched his wound, and after a night of agonizing struggle, he emerged from the risk of life and death. Nick, on the other hand, checked multiple times before staying all night at the FBI headquarters. The Army quickly obtained the bullet map information when he questioned his female coworker just 22 minutes after the gunfire. Nick thinks that this unusually quick detection may have been planned in advance. Swagger has a reputation as a professional marksman, according to military data. However, his shooting error exceeded the normal situation dozens of times during this assassination. In addition, Timmons' testimony contains a number of contradictions. Nick believes this to be a premeditated murder after hearing from a female colleague that Timmons had been shot to death by a robber last night in an alley. He went right to the church bell tower to look into it, and here, he found more doubts. After looking on the internet, he found that someone had used a remote-controlled sniper rifle in the bell tower 2.5 days later, but there was still no evidence of Swagger's. After Swagger regained consciousness, Johnson ordered an exhaustive investigation into his social connections. He was furious when he heard the news. Johnson's men penniless into Strut's home and shot his pet canine. Strut chooses to figure out reality and get equity following a few days of cautious consideration. His shot injury step by step recuperated in the wake of living respectively. Sarah totally believed him. She, like Strut, never felt that Fen was no more. They gave each other firm hugs, but they kept their distance in an effort to control their boom emotions at all times. Before Swagger vanished, Sarah intended to keep the snake out of the den when she gave him Fen's rifle. "We need Sarah's assistance." She contacted Nick in secret and gave him the chassis number when he got back to headquarters. He checked this chassis number in secret, stole Director Dobler's D-Class passport, and Dobler immediately noticed the anomaly and told Johnson about it. The military has noticed Nick. Nick found an oil contractor with a military background shortly after he was kidnapped by an unknown group of masked bandits in a remote lair. After torturing Nick in vain, the kidnappers gave him a special suicide device. This led Johnson to decide to take action against him at this time. This method works very well. They have used it before, as well. It is possible to classify a suicide even if a fingerprint check or a bullet track are found. At the moment, the kidnapper's head was struck by a bullet. A shadowy figure in the distance was rowing a boat to shore, and Swagger began planning a counterattack. The other two men, who did not have time to react, fell one by one under the gun's muzzle. Nick said that is his bait. Swagger, this is the trap. Now, Nick can only follow Swagger to discover the truth and cannot turn around. They traveled by car to Tennessee and paid a visit to a legendary sniper known as Sandor. Sandor is a skilled sniper who kills without distinction between men, women, or children. Several years ago, the army used heavy weapons to bomb a block of concrete on his head. It is estimated that he is disabled if he is still alive. Johnson was also well aware that Swagger would definitely investigate Sandor, and that if you want to catch a wolf, you must release the meat. Swagger now remembered that there was such a person at Johnson's side. Nick successfully discovered Sandor's hideout with the assistance of a female colleague after Johnson made the decision to use Sandor as bait to entice Swagger. Swagger made a lot of weaponry by purchasing a few supermarket parts. He was aware that there were numerous traps all around the mansion just waiting for him to fall into them. He must rush in, despite the extremely dangerous location. Because of his ability to disguise himself, Nick is in charge of observing and checking the situation of the adversary for Swagger. Swagger defeated the outside mercenaries with success. When he broke into the mansion by stealth, he planted time bombs in every crevice and crevice of the building. Sandor was not at all alarmed or surprised because he was aware that Swagger would arrive and that no one could stop him. Swagger inquired of Sandor regarding Johnson's real name and the parties involved in this mess. He hears from Sandor that Johnson has many names and has a complicated past. He was given a single task by Johnson, after which he would be discarded. The Archbishop was the target of the most recent attempt to kill the president. Wait for the person you want to kill to stand next to the president before taking any action if you want to do so without raising suspicion. The speech by the Archbishop reveals the sinister activities that are taking place in Africa to construct the oil pipeline. More than 400 bodies of men, women, and children were buried under an oil pumping station. Swagger's mission in Africa at the time was to protect the leaders of the oil trade. The oil merchants conspired with the army and secretly sent mercenaries to massacre the village. Charles, a senator, turned out to be the man behind Mr. Johnson. They are a group that helps each other. Despite the fact that the public authority understands what occurred in Africa, they generally claim to be hard of hearing as though nothing occurred. This is human insatiability in the wake of saying that Sandor made a weapon and effort himself. Right now countless hired fighters from everywhere accumulated and encompassed the house, under the command of Swagger. Nick set off bombs all around the mansion. The mercenaries who stormed into the raid were immediately destroyed, and petrol bombs exploded, engulfing the enemy in an instant. After a fight to the death, they finally destroyed the enemy and managed to escape the encirclement. Johnson informed Senator Charles of this. Charles stated that there will always be someone who wants to be the hero, so he would do anything to get rid of him so that Swagger would know who the daddy is. The kidnappers sneak into the Star's house at night and follow the lead to Sarah. Johnson's men investigated Swagger's credit cards and threatened Swagger that they had kidnapped Sarah. However, Swagger obtained the Sandor recording and the two sides met to exchange information on the snowy mountain at the same time. Swagger hasn't appeared yet, but he knew that Johnson was a sinister and cruel man who was bound to have an ambush around Swagger lying motionless on the snowy ground, attuned to his surroundings. Johnson and Charles arrived at the agreed-upon location by helicopter. Sarah is tightly controlled by the kidnappers. He let Nick wear protective gear to stop the enemy from shooting, and when the enemy revealed his position, he destroyed many sniper hideouts. Shortly after he shot off the kidnapper's finger, holding the gun, the second shot broke the kidnapper's arm, and he fell to the ground yelling as Swagger descended from the faraway mountain peak. Swagger had two preparations. He informed the FBI about the meeting place and Charles saw that he was talented and wanted to buy him as his henchman. Sarah picked up the gun from the ground and shoots repeatedly at her kidnapper. He mumbled something about the world having no sides. The greatest lie the world tells the United States about is freedom, not oil refining. When he sent mercenaries to slaughter the village, Swagger rejected him, saying that he just wanted to go back to the mountains and live a quiet, simple life. He did not regret his actions. According to Swaggers, they were taken into custody and transported to the Department of Justice in Washington when the FBI arrived. Grumbled in demand, the head legal officer held a gathering with him to stand up to him to figure out reality. The FBI chief and Johnson were both approached to join the gathering. Nick took advantage of the chance to shake hands. Swaggeringly passing a bullet, the FBI has kept the sniper rifle that discovered that the murder scene actually belonged to Swagger, and no one has touched it since. After reloading, Swagger aimed the gun at Johnson, but Johnson did not fire it. It turned out that she uses a gun every time he goes outside, so the bullet didn't go off. He removes the firing pin from his sniper rifle to prevent it from firing. Furthermore, despite Johnson's lack of remorse, this detail appears extremely difficult to detect. The immediate facts fully demonstrate that Swagger was harmed by Johnson. Nick presented the Attorney General with the evidence he had gathered regarding Johnson's massacre of civilians. Those are shocking images full of blood. Johnson, however, has discovered that this is America. Because the massacre occurred in a different nation, only an international court can impose punishment. The equity serve was additionally defenseless. He could take a gander at the culprits meandering the law. Johnson was self-important and incited Strut, saying, "Swagger's eyes were red with rage, I win you lose again." The equity serve moaned and let him know that this is the world we live in. Justice may not always prevail. Even though drawing a gun doesn't always work, it sometimes does. Johnson and Charles were having a drink at the mansion in the suburbs that evening when Swagger was granted his freedom by the court. Johnson will depart the United States early tomorrow morning, just as the country was celebrating its victory. Swagger remains hidden like a ghost in the darkness, hiding like a ghost in the dark, and the bodyguard were also quickly killed under him. Charles was shaking all over and questioning Swagger when the bullet of justice fell from the sky. The others were terrified and crawled on the ground like maggots. "I'm a U.S. Senator. Have you lost your mind? Are you crazy?" Having stated that he shot Charles in the head immediately after breaking the gas pipe and leaving the location, Swagger responded coldly and precisely. There was a tremendous blast behind him. In the event that equity wasn't possible, he would do it without anyone's help. Sarah is waiting for him on the side of the road as Swagger makes his way through the jungle at this very moment. The film comes to a close. Turn on notifications, please subscribe for more videos like this, and like the channel to support it. Thank you very much for watching.